Okay, so hello everyone. We're going to unpack the prelim paper. So make sure that you have your paper as well as writing materials for you to annotate certain aspects of the paper. So let's go through the different question type. Okay, so for question 1, it is obviously a messaged question. For question 2, it is a purpose question. And for question 3, it is a hybrid surprised. And you are expected to compare two sources. Right, next for question 4, it is a simple compare-contrast question. However, later on we'll unpack what is specific about this compare and contrast question. And of course, for question 5, it is our taking perspective. All right, let's go to the background information. Okay, so the background information actually talks about what impact do plastic waste have on the environment. So when we talk about impact, we are looking at consequences. Okay, and in this particular background information, you can see that the issue revolves around how plastic waste is very serious. It is serious whether it is in Asia, in Africa, which are developing countries, or even Britain, which is a developed country. And the main reason that is being stated in the background information is really about the convenience of plastic, specifically single-use plastic that we can find every day. And one of the possible solution offered was to ensure that plastic does not enter our water source, rivers as well as the sea. Okay, so holistically, this background information does not give you the benefits of plastic, but it does tell you the detrimental or the negative effects of plastic. All right, let's take a look at source A. It is a cartoon published in an online forum, 28 December 2018. And I'm very sure most of you could have detected the sarcasm as well as the mockery, where the man was looking for a plastic bag, but specifically the fishmonger or the fish seller was actually saying that the plastic is already inside. Okay, I don't think she was smiling for the sake of smiling. Now, the question is, what is the cartoonist messaged? And in any message question, you must have that message statement. So there were some of you who could identify that it was sarcasm and mockery, but you did not have the to something. Okay, so just be very specific. Just check your answers. Okay, while you were able to identify the sarcasm, the mocking tone, what is the specific message, right? And if you look very carefully, the message is to convince the British people that the problem was at a very critical stage, as well as you could even write it such that it is to criticize the public, the British public specifically, for the use of unnecessary single-use plastic and the refusal to change their habits. I think that is one of the other possibility that you could actually consider in your answers. Okay, so for this particular question, quite easy. Just make sure that you have the message statement very clearly. Now for question B, it is a purpose question. So purpose question, let's take a look at our provenance. Okay, so let's identify the audience. Now it is a poster published in a local newspaper, so definitely the audience are Singaporeans, all right? And you can see that it's a bit wordy in terms of provenance, but it is trying to unpack and trying to tell you specifically the role of other organizations, specifically the non-profit and non-government organization, rather than individuals or the government. Okay, so actually this particular source B is very important, not only for the purpose question, but also when we are unpacking question 5, taking perspective. And if you look at source B, okay? So it does tell you a few things. It is very factual, all right? There's not really mockery here, all right? However, there are very interesting or very, I would say, enlightening facts, okay, that is being highlighted. All right, the very fact that you are using too much plastic, and too much plastic is able to actually fill up 94 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Similarly, when we look at the use of plastic bags, okay, you can see that Singaporeans actually use too many plastic bags, okay, that you could actually fill up 126, I guess, land mass of Gardens by the Bay. Same thing when we used PP plastic, all right, and we can use PP plastic, as you can see here, mostly in our beverages, our bubble teas, all right. Now, this is again a purpose question. We identify purpose question by the question type. Why was this poster published? And it was published to convince or even to criticize the audience, Singaporeans, that we're just using too much plastic in our daily lives. All right. And quite easy, you are able to quote this part here from the source, okay, source details, and sort of like summarized what you were giving as evidence in the source details. So the only thing that we have seen in your answers is you must make sure that you quote your source details properly. Some of you were quite haphazard in your quoting of your source details, okay, and some of you just left it here. Now, this is again a purpose question, so you must remember the context. And again, you look at the context specifically. I think the easiest would definitely be the background information, but some of you were quite good in the very fact that you actually gave the context, such as the Semakau landfill. All right, the very fact that if we continue to actually use a lot of plastic, we're not able to dispose of plastic. So that was an accepted context. Okay, this answer, however, just looked at the background information. So as you are doing your revision, take a look again at your background information. Okay, and of course the outcome. Okay, it is to create awareness so that Singaporeans can use lesser plastic or to change our habits. The only key message that I would have, or the key thing that you need to take note of, if you had written to create awareness as your message, it is actually quite hard to find another kind of outcome. Okay, so be very careful that usually your message statement as well as your outcome that is written as a reason must be written as a reason, all right, to create awareness, so that or because. Please do not get it mixed up. Okay, use simpler message statements. I think that will be easier so that you could write a proper outcome. I think that is one of the key takeaways as we were marking your paper. So I hope you remember that part. Now for question 3, we are looking at the surprise question, or the hybrid surprise. Okay, now step 1, we must always remember that when we are looking at surprise question, there must be always an element of surprise. Okay, so when we look at source C and D, what is the element of surprise that you can find? Okay, but you must always remember that your first paragraph, you need to use both the two sources. Okay, why? Because you need to answer the question. They are asking you to study sources C and D. So step 3, okay, this is sort of the writing scaffold, the writing guide. Now in step 4, your paragraph 2, you can make the argument or the claim that, source C does not make source D surprising for reason. Is there something in the provenance? Is there something in the source that you are not surprised about? Or a cross-reference that you're not surprised about? Alright, so now let's unpack source C. It is published on 30th October 2018 by a non-government platform, and it claims about how these big brands are trying to cut on plastic waste, and specifically because they are sort of pressured. And you can see that the reason is because they are clogging a lot of landfills and choking the seas. And when we unpack source D, look at the difference in the date. Okay, and this is published in a British newspaper with very interesting headlines. Okay, even from the headlines you can see, quite surprising already. All right, and it says here that they are the largest producer of plastic waste, not wasters, so sorry about that, and many still continue to purchase from them because it is the belief that the consumers still prefer plastic bottles, and the big brands claim that they are accommodating to their consumers. Okay, so let's unpack what is surprising and not surprising about these two sources. So specifically, they are surprising because they do show the different perspective. I think a lot of you were able to see that source C shows that it is these big brands do pledge to cut down on plastic, whereas source D shows that they will not. So I think for this, most of you could identify it. Um, the other source details that will not make it surprising or is actually both do pledge to remove plastic or find alternatives. You can see the green color underlined in the source detail. They are also not surprising because both do identify that Coca-Cola was the worst contributors to plastic waste. So you can see that from this particular part, it is just comparing content and content. You are comparing both source C as well as comparing both source D. You are comparing both the surprise aspect as well as the not surprise aspect. Now, however, if you want to push yourself, look very carefully. Specifically, there is a time factor element. Now, both sources are interviews taken at different years. The mindset could have changed, the trend could have changed, and in 2 years, perhaps, Coca-Cola could have innovated and used some sort of biodegradable plastic that could cause less harm to the environment. Some of you claim about they had different opinions, so that was also accepted if you had used the not surprising due to time factor. The other aspect, some of you, not all of you did this, or not all of you could have identified. It is not surprising to see the different opinion because at the end of it, in 2020, Coca-Cola is still a profit-making company. And if the consumers decided that they prefer using bottled drink, I think there is no hurry for Coca-Cola to change. Some of you gave answers not surprising due to cross-reference, and you did identify either the background information or even source B, but specifically for source B, you need to make sure that you only cross-reference to the PET bottles or the PET bottles for reason because that was the plastic that was being used specifically for Coca-Cola. Okay, it is not surprising specifically because there is this convenience of plastic bottles. That is why I was telling you in the beginning of the video about the background information, the convenience of the throwaway culture. Now, some of you attempted to do purposed, okay, and for this, there wasn't really a specific style of doing purpose, but it is really about when you are looking at both the two sources, why is it not surprising? Okay, the highest level went to not surprising due to purpose. I think some of you were trying to do surprise. It was very surprising because of purpose. That was a wrong misinterpretation. Okay, and it is not surprising because specifically in source C, it was written in a non-government platform, and the whole idea is to convince the world that there will be some necessary actions to reduce their plastic waste, whereas in source D, it was written specifically to defend Coca-Cola's stand. Okay, customers or consumers wanted it, hence the outcome was to convince the British people or even the activists who were blaming Coca-Cola to be the number one plastic waste company, that it was only responding to what consumer wanted, and they were not the only guilty party. So both of them had different intentions and different outcomes. So that is why it is not surprising based on purpose. Now for the next question, we are looking about, it's basically a compare contrast question, but you need to make sure that in any compare contrast question, you must use the two sources, and especially if you have already the question type how far. All right. However, for this, you need to scope it in terms of the effectiveness of measure to reduce plastic waste. So we're looking at, of course, when you compare, you must look at similar key ideas, as well as when you're comparing the difference, you are looking at opposing ideas. Now we're looking at how far, and we are looking at effectiveness and ineffectiveness. However, in some of your scripts, it is 0 for reason because one, the question did not start with how similar and how different they are. The question started with effectiveness. So if you did not answer the question, it is either a 0 marks or it is a 1 mark. So please be careful in the O level, in the national exams. You must answer the question first before stating your claims, whether it is similar in key ideas or different in key ideas. Alright, so when we look at both source E and source F, remember we're talking about effectiveness. So in source E, it does show the effectiveness because of the ban that was imposed by the Kenyan government, whereas in the green color, it actually shows the ineffectiveness. They are sort of saying that there were some loopholes, there were some issues um, with the ban itself, or even after imposing the ban. Okay, so effective is the one in red, ineffective is the one in green. So both sources agree that the measures were effective. All right, so state the source details and explain it. And both sources disagree that measures were effective because there were loopholes. Okay, and of course you give the source details for both the two sources. Now both of them were similar, okay, in their purpose. They wanted to convince the British that while measures could be enforced by the government, it takes everyone to play a part, and the intention was to convince the British to also contribute to reducing the problem. That means it is not just a government aspect, it is really basically everyone plays a part. Now we've come to the taking perspective question. For this, as we are marking your question, I think a lot of you managed to unpack and understand the question. There was some misinterpretation, but it was not bad. Some of you unfortunately only got level 1 because you did not answer how far you would agree. That means I agree, I disagree. Some of you still wrote source A, source B. So I think that was really careless on your part. I'll explain the rest of you why. For some of you, even when you answer properly, you did not get the higher marks. Okay. Now, this is an agency or a role kind of taking perspective question. That means you must identify the different groups who are responsible for reducing plastic waste. So step 1 is based on the case study, who are responsible for reducing the plastic waste. The government is given as your question, in your question. All right, so individuals, consumers, and government. I think if you had looked and if you had seen all the different sources, you could identify which source actually talks about individual, consumers, government. There could be overlaps. So once there's overlap, you need to choose only one perspective. Now, step 2 is you identify how they are responsible and what is their role to reduce plastic waste. So your answer must have the following elements. When we talk about responsible, it is about responsible in reducing plastic waste, in providing a solution in managing plastic waste. Some of you would have written at the corner of your sources who is responsible and how they are responsible. And so what? All right. What is the impact if they are responsible? Now, I'd like to highlight to you that this particular question and this entire paper was modeled after the 2017 O-level social studies paper, specifically about the haste. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that this type of questions, you need to clearly identify the group responsible. You need to make sure that why each of the groups should be made responsible. All right. You also need to take note what they had done to make a difference. The limitation of their existing strategies is also accepted as an answer. But what is important here is this part. The stronger responses showcase a blend of these reasons. That means for you to get the higher marks, you need to ensure that you have a mix of it. You have a mix of explaining why they should be responsible, explaining what they had done to reduce plastic waste, the limitations, as well as how they could have done better. All right, and specifically about the greatest awareness of different issues. That means the impact, the follow-up. So what? All right, so we're going to unpack all the sources again, and we're going to zoom in on the so what or the link or the larger outcome. All right, source A, we're going back to source A. And if you look very carefully, source A, we have identified it as the individual is responsible. Okay, so a lot of you managed to identify this source details. You're able to explain the source details. You stop short of here. Okay, a lot of you are saying that, oh, okay, at the end of it, the individual is responsible because they have a choice. Some did not even write choice. Okay, now if they had a choice, what then is the impact of it? Okay, how will it help to reduce waste? Because once you have a choice, you choose not to consume unnecessary plastic, which will then greatly reduce plastic waste. So you can see that it is a very systematic way of thinking. Individual is responsible, they have a choice, and if they have a choice, they are able to reduce plastic waste. And in some of your answers, it was really written really well because it was really simple and you follow through the steps. Now for source B, we have also identified it as the individuals are responsible. I know some of you were talking about how the NGOs, that means how other organizations were responsible. It was also accepted, okay, based on your answers. But this particular answer talks about individuals because it is about the awareness, okay, of individuals, and they are the only ones who have the power to change their habits. And if they choose to change their habits, it will lead to lesser plastic waste and a better environment. And specifically, if you talked about NGOs, okay, you can also talk about how they raise the awareness, and through educating the people, they're able to convince people to change their habits to reduce plastic waste. Now you can see here that the link does not have to link all the way to economic or to even a better standard of living, because for this particular question type, you need to just tell me what is the outcome of them being responsible. And you need to really very clearly state like how are they responsible? All right, so I think some of your answers require the extra thought and the extra thinking. So I think you have to be very careful with that. Now for question C, okay, here we have identified as companies, manufacturers. I will accept that. Source details, explaining source details. Now, companies are responsible because they shape consumer patterns and demands. I think some of you wrote that this was a consumer point of view. I would accept that if you're able to give me a very good argument. Okay. However, some of you were able to actually identify this, which I'm very glad to see. You're talking about if companies could find alternatives. You're talking about biodegradable alternatives to plastic. I think that was really good. You would have already gotten the marks, okay? Or if they could educate consumers to use less plastic, then the problem of plastic waste will be reduced, and specifically because companies have the means, the technologies to find alternatives. So that is why they are the ones that are responsible. Same thing with source D. All right, we have identified as some of you have identified as manufacturers. I will accept that too, provided that your link does not overlap with source C. For here, we have identified it as individuals because here it talks about the individuals continue to demand for plastic. So because of that, we have identified that individuals should actually changed their habits. Okay, they can signal to companies to stop using plastic waste by boycotting such products. Okay, and then it will force companies to find alternative means. All right, so at the end of the day, it does depend on what are the source detail that you actually picked up, and when you picked up the source detail, how do you explain it? I think that is very important. Now for source E, we have identified it as the government is responsible. Now, specifically because of the use of the ban, right? I think the implementation of rules, the implementation of regulation, the government is responsible because through punitive measures, heavy fines, or even prison terms, people are deterred to use plastic. I think this was the word that or the phrase that I was looking for that was a lot of the time missing in your answers. You just stopped at this. Okay, you just stopped about has been successful. But successful why? All right, because once the government has measures put in place, the people will fear the rules, right? And because of that, there is a reduction in the use of plastic and improving the quality of life. All right, so this is the aspect that you were missing. You were missing that the people will fear, or the people will be deterred, or the people will be afraid. The people do not want to pay the fine. So I just wanted you to elaborate that part a little bit more before giving the highest level of answers. Same with source F. All right, the government is responsible because it is through the banning, people in Kenya no longer go to their old ways of using excessive plastic, and it has resulted in a livable condition. Some of you actually said that the government is responsible to make the laws even, I guess, even more punitive, even more harsh, because here it does tell you about smugglers, right? So some of you actually said that, and I would have accepted those answers as well. Of course, the last part is for some of you, you decided to actually do bonus. I think I did come across answers that had very good, well explained, balanced conclusion. But I just want to tell you that focus specifically on giving 2 yes, 2 no's, I think, to get your level 3 8 marks. Okay, and if you have time, definitely try to attempt your bonus. Okay, having said that, I think some of you, I could see the thought process, and definitely you don't have to wait for 2 yes to no. Straight away, if one of the source does let's give that that added information for you to question the reliability, go ahead. Okay. However, I think some of you were tempting to say a yes and no. And it does actually mean that you need to use the sources to give a balanced conclusion. All right. And the very fact that it is both the responsibility of the government as well as the individuals, and hence both need to work together. Okay, so this is an example of how we do bonus, and hopefully listen back to the questions and take note of the different unpacking, as well as focus on your question 5.